Thank you very much. Thanks to you, the dragon has been resealed.
What's the connection with the unborn?
The dragon was made by the life force of this planet itself.
When I was 18 years old, I saw for the first time in my life, I saw a vision of idiocy. I saw a cutscene. It was about 2.5 minutes long, but it felt much longer. However, there was a 16-second stretch in that cutscene which, as simple as it seemed, changed me, changed my fate, changed who I am, made me who or what I am, emboldened me. The video game it was from, Bloody Roar 4. The series was old. This game came out 3 years earlier, and the series came into existence roughly 9 years before that. And there it was, on the television before me. I saw a game. What was it called? Bloody Roar 4. The story here is of a man, a zoanthrope man. He is Yugo Ogami, but he is more than that. I will get to this later, but first, let's just say he is Yugo, a zoanthrope man. And then there is another man, Ryoho, and a little girl, Mana. This is the order of everything. When I see the nature of mankind, its desires, its needs, its obstacles to them and the other humans who put them there, you could look at everything as a man, another man, and a little girl. 3 beings, both harmonious and yet at odds with each other. So this cutscene I saw about this man, Yugo, and the other man and the girl, Ryoho and Mana, you see, yes, it's about everything. This insignificant moment in a cutscene, lo and behold, is not so insignificant anymore. So yes, when I was 18, I saw this cutscene, and it hit me all at once. It's stupidity. I recorded it, and every day I tried not to look at it and say, okay, what the fuck am I looking at? What is this doing to me? Why was this allowed to exist? Yugo Ogami. He stands facing away from the camera, his head turned away from the person he's talking to. Look at the man on the ground, or not even at him perhaps. The sightlines don't really add up. Then without moving, and without showing a definitive emotion somehow, he asks about something. It is something he wants to know, but it may not be there. He says, and he's still seemingly looking at nothing. He says, "What's the connection with the unborn?" This. I always come back to this. Because I was still young at the time. I'm much older now. And I still don't have the answers. I still don't know the secrets. So this question is still relevant today. Yugo doesn't move, and he simply asks, "What's the connection with the unborn?" And then it happens. You see it, you hear, it's like divine intervention, but a lot more underwhelming. The answer is suddenly there, and it under-overwhelms you. A child explains where the dragon came from. It is the planet's dragon, a zoanthrope dragon. But this child, Mana, explains the dragon's origin. And with a disposition that's dry and bland, but still leaves me asking why and trying to understand. Try and why. Bland and understand. The child explains, the dragon was made by the life force of the planet itself. The planet? What's the planet's name? Let's take a step back for a moment. Let's try to examine this from every angle, every point of view. When I first witnessed this cutscene, I was at my parents' house. I'd found this game at a local GameStop, paid $12.57, and I took it home and I put it in my PlayStation 2 console. The disc, I mean, not the box. I struggled with buyer's remorse for a bit and tried to play through the arcade mode with a couple characters. And then this cutscene played. Just like Yugo, I was also wearing one of those long-sleeve shirts with the flames going down the arms. And I thought to myself, wow, those shirts are played out already, huh? Although I never felt the need to also wear a t-shirt with a stretched out neck over the top of my flame arms long sleeve. I get hot way too easily to layer up like that. I thought little of this cutscene at the time, but then I went back and I watched it again 5 days later, and I was entranced. I needed to learn what I could from it. The information available to me was minimal, but I had enough. A little girl in a robe, Mana. All right, she seems to be the most important part of this whole charade. And then, yes, another clue, the design on the back of Yugo's shirt. A set of wings, each composed of 4 wave-like feathers. Yes, I'm definitely onto something. 1, Mana, little girl. 2, Yugo, flames and wings on his clothes. And that unremarkable man on the ground. I knew that his name was Ryoho. The script reminded me that every time he spoke. But I had these other clues. Mana, Yugo, and then I saw something else. At the bottom center of the screen was one of Ryoho's hands. His right hand was... What's this? His hand is partially embedded in the ground. And much like his hand, I knew I had to dig deeper. I visited my local library, but they didn't have the information I was looking for. And so I wound up consulting my internet library and a couple mail-in newsletters to find what I was looking for. Kenji Fukuya, a Japanese game director, was in charge of a video game series, Bloody Roar, the lead man of which was Yugo Ogami, designed in part with the help of another man, Naochika Morishita. From that day forward, I witnessed all the other animated atrocities this game had to offer. But these cutscenes resonated with me less and less, being replaced with melancholy and a dull headache. I found the US and Japanese offices for the developer and sometimes publisher Hudson Soft, and I sent them letters. Long letters. Pages on pages in length, reaching the point that I was practically sending them books. I was asking, sometimes in less than kind words, if they could simply try making the game over again. Once more with feeling. But I also asked them to upload that one section of that one cutscene so that it could be more easily watched, digested, and dissected. The world must see, I wrote, for it is a window into not just a poorly written, poorly acted, poorly translated mess of a game, but into our very existence, our purpose. Can you imagine if they did that? But no, nothing. Not a single word in response. The game eventually lost my morbid curiosity. I stopped playing it, and frankly, I was much healthier for it. But I didn't want to lose what I was able to perceive from those few seconds of video. So I watched that one part of that one cutscene as often as I could. The connection scene. That's what I would come to call it. The connection scene. Everything about it hurts to think about for too long. I can only describe it as a perpetual motion machine of meaning. With every watching, something new is witnessed or discerned from it. Some new connection is made. As though some otherworldly figure selected this brief moment in multimedia as the outlet through which to dispense wisdom to laymen like me. But I will say this. When I see the connection scene, every single time I look at and listen to the people, see the scenery, the dialogue, the background music, and the sound effects, the arrangement of every physical object in this digital world, I see something beyond the beyond. Do I see this in other things? Actually, yes. And I worry about that sometimes. Some things are things, and this is one of them. I can look at the hue of the hair on Yugo's head, and it is just the right color. The unnatural shade of Mana's hair. How could any rational human being make this, let alone a team of them? I have a theory about Kenji Fukuya. After a copious amount of research, and even with the internet available, there wasn't much to find, but Kenji Fukuya, he first appeared as a special thanks credit for Kabuki Clash in 1995, and while that and most other games are objectively superior to Bloody Roar 4, there isn't anything in them as subtly intellectually stimulating as the connection scene. You have to wonder about the man who was able to just once in his career, by accident or by design, lead the creation of a scene so subconsciously haunting. There is no single word to properly describe. There may be something otherworldly at work. I've seen my share of bad games, and when you see something that's just... It triggers all the wrong emotions and synapses in the mind, but you feel as though there's something beyond the suck. The secret behind the suck. Bloody Roar 4? A fight-or-flight response kicks in as Yugo and Ryoho and Mana, attempting to coexist but failing to do so, seeking harmony only to suffer a continuous loop of cognitive dissonance. The various shades of white and off-white clothing, the brown of Yugo's hair versus the brown of the wooden floor, Ryoho laying face down on the ground, literally pressing his face directly into the wood while in what would otherwise be a standing position. And it's more than just colors and awkward positions because... All right, try to follow me on this. I've experimented with this a lot over the years. Take just this shot from this scene and pretend that you were viewing it from above. You would see one dot for Mana, one dot for Yugo, and Ryoho has a line separating them. This is the mathematical symbol for division. It's a symbol so universal, you could replace all three parts of it and still express the same idea. Replace the Mana dot with a clown car. Replace the Yugo dot with, I don't know, a tree stump. And replace Ryoho with a boisine. And the same meaning is expressed. It just works. This is a universal arrangement. I don't know why it continues to work, but I've examined the connection scene and compared the proportions and poses of Yugo, Mana, and Ryoho to several mathematical and physics-based constants. Euler's number, the Boltzmann constant, FOIL, the list goes on. And it's frankly terrifying, shocking even, that they have anything to do with each other. You could take a single object from a single frame of the connection scene, such as the sleeves of Mana's robe. Take those sleeves from any frame before the camera cut, and you will find that they form a bell curve, a near-perfect normal distribution. It makes you wonder if there is some other dimensional power at work, or if some bitter Japanese math teacher is playing a cruel joke on the player. There's not a doubt in my mind that Kenji Fukuya is one of the people of all time. Kenji Fukuya is capable of stuff. At least I think so. He exists, but this goes far beyond him. I think we might see that some other asshole on YouTube will deceive themselves into revering and respecting this scene for all the wrong reasons. Fukuya-san was at one point possibly becoming a master of his craft, the Führer of fighting games. The things said about Kenji Fukuya in 500 years might be the same things we say about playwrights and intellectual saviors cut down in their prime ages ago. He is a modern-day Christopher Marlowe or Gareth Evans, mixing humanity and anti-intellectualism with philosophy of the mind, all coinciding like planets in a solar system, aligning for this brief, shining moment before being lost just as quickly as it happened. All these things combine to say something so dirt simple, yet leave so many questions, and subsequently give the subtlest hint of an answer to each of them. This cutscene is Kenji's Coca-Cola, an earth-shattering discovery that happened by accident. And that brings us to this video's sponsor, Ground Cherry Coke. Did you know that the way everyone perceives cherry Coke is largely affected by one key factor, the place they see it sold? People who enjoy it see it being sold by businesses that are clean and well-respected, while those who don't tend to see it being sold in back alleys or on the dark web or at Walmart. Ground Cherry Coke cuts through the bias by teleporting the user to a featureless void where the only other object is an ice-cold can of cherry Coke, thus allowing the user to come to their own conclusions about it, free of any outside influences steering them one way or the other. It's also free of any way out of said void. Use the discount code all along the Coke Tower to get a 2% discount on the $15,000 exit portal. Ground Cherry Coke. No bias. Or pretty much anything else except cherry Coke. I often look at Ryoho's particular pose in this scene. He is rigid and unmoving, and his posture is reminiscent of the Moai statues on Easter Island, if they all face-planted. And yet he's still calm, relaxed, and a little unnerving, like a macabre human-like Hulk in a Zdzisław Bekczynski painting. His hands are curled as though his subconscious is still unaware his fight is over, not unlike Hiro Onoda, the stranded Japanese soldier who didn't realize or believe that World War II ended, in part because he heard it was Japan who surrendered. But then the camera cuts to Mana, and I didn't realize this before, but it just came to me. This portion of the cutscene is a microcosm of the entire game. All the tech problems, the struggle to reach the lofty expectation of competence, right? What is the connection? Why is the connection? All of that is traced, colored, and rendered into Mana's pose here. You can see it in the angle of her head. Mana's eyes look up slightly. her braids spiraling upward until she got lazy and stopped doing them at cheek level, drawing the player's eye upward. The ever-expanding scope of this, I'm dumbfounded. Really, after 173 years of my watching and dissecting this same portion of one cutscene, I'm able to discover new relations. It's a testament to how much time I've wasted. For 11 years, I was deeply involved in medieval literature research because is there a connection between dragons and the unborn? Yes. Can dragons or anything connect to the unborn? Do we know? Can only dragons connect to the unborn? The research says no. Dragons have a certain naturally occurring peptide in their blood which is incapable of dimerization in the presence of the unborn. Yet in this game there are several scenes of the dragon in close proximity with the unborn. While it is true that dragons exposed to the microscopic airborne saliva particles naturally exhaled by the unborn are 35% more likely to develop tuberculosis, these facts are biological life science. After visiting various facilities dedicated to researching microbiology and genomic biology, as well as the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego, I was no closer to finding a connection with the unborn. I was looking for any and every insight. Those TV lawyers need to examine their cases from every angle, and so I constantly deconstructed the connection scene. Each day, I would focus on some new, seemingly trivial detail. The wooden floor. I have a replica of it in my home. I'm an expert in wood. So the whole connection thing was a bit of a hang-up for me. This was the state I was in until... Now this is key. This is the breakthrough. The floor is not really a floor. I could tell that right away, and I looked at the most literal aspects of this cutscene to unlock the metaphorical insights within. I worked at a water garden store for a few months back in the early 2000s. I was learning the life aquatic to inform the life botanical, the Piscine to inform the vegetative. Yugo was asking about the connection with the unborn, but it was so much more than just Yugo asking about the connection with the unborn. But how could one ever hope to fully assemble this puzzle without knowing everything there is to know about Victoria Amazonica water lilies? All right, here's an example. Yoho lays face first, flat on the ground, his right hand partially submerged through the floor. I realize that this is reminiscent of a water lily, their large leaves and flowers floating on the surface, while the stems extend underwater and into the soil. And the sight of the thorny water lily Victoria Amazonica attracted the attention of Spanish conquistadors, leading to the fall of the Inca Empire in the 1500s. So you see, Ryoho's position in this cutscene is more than him just laying down. It is his silent commentary on colonialism and the lack of respect for indigenous cultures. But I didn't know that about Victoria Amazonica's water lilies until I came across an 8-inch floppy disk in the archives of a small horticultural laboratory in Oregon. You have to assemble the information to deconstruct the scene. And the breakthrough with the monopose came later. It was actually about 4 years ago. Monopose is a term associated with the haka, a series of ceremonial dances originating from the Maori people of what is now mainland New Zealand. This pose is typically employed in a haka of derision, meant to insult a person or persons while unifying those performing the haka. This pose only refers to the position of the head, tilted downward slightly with the eyes averted, the rough equivalent of turning one's back to a person trying to initiate or continue a conversation. The translation of this became muddled between its native New Zealand and Japan, as instead of insulting the heart or character of the recipient, in this scene it simply insults the intelligence of anybody who witnesses it. The person behind this mistranslation was a Hudson Soft intern by the name of Ryoji Homura. His name doesn't appear in the credits, but through a Japanese contact I established in my years of research, which I spent playing Ragnarok Online, I learned that it was he who was given the task of going to New Zealand and recording video of this haka as a reference for the mocap actors. He was, of course, not paid for any of this, but as a different type of compensation, it was agreed that a character in the game that he did this work for would bear his name. He was told to write in hiragana, in first name, last name format, his name. But when he did so, his pen ran out of ink while he was writing the G part of his name. He got another pen and wrote his last name, but the G part of his name was so faint, it was indiscernible. And since Mura is a way of saying village names, the character designer who saw that name thought it was the name of a place. And in adapting it to a person's name, he dropped the Mura portion. And the result? Ryoho. Do you see the genius? Sickness. Incompetence. Kenji Fukuya was directing traffic in the eye of a hurricane of incapability, and somehow, albeit barely, produced this. It was at this point, around 3 years ago, when I realized I needed to view this scene not just from the different perspectives, but from different fields of study, including those that are total bullshit. Naturally, I tried astrology, but the best I could divine from that was that they really should have added a crab zoanthrope. It was as I woke up on the floor of my home office, covered in old issues of Arcadia magazine, that I gazed up at my computer. The screen was black. So, I groggily stood up, bumped the mouse with the outside of my hand, and I was greeted by a web browser set to a specific page for the webcomic Megatokyo, dated September 1st, 2000. Some have referred to this as the Leet strip. In it, a man on an airplane, speaking in a coordinated arrangement of numbers, letters, and punctuation, is calling for help. He is injured somehow. The flight attendant can't understand what he's saying and calls out, "Does anyone here speak Leet?" Another man in a nearby window seat casually raises his index finger and utters, "Joe." The Leet strip is something I could go on about for another 27 minutes or so, but the point is this. As I stared at the man speaking Leet, who was calling for a doctor and his medication to deal with chest pains, my subconscious was pierced by a revelation. Numbers and letters together. Their use and meanings becoming intertwined. In Japanese, a common method of deriving nicknames or shorthand names for people is to take the moras, or syllables, of their names and replace them with their rough numerical equivalents. For example, a professional wrestler with a permanently confused face, going by the name Yoshihashi, is also known as 4484. 4 in Japanese can be said as yo or shi, and 8 in Japanese is hachi. This was it, I thought. I happened to be studying Japanese, and I could count from 0 to 99,999 at the time. All right, I thought. Let's start with mana. Ma, na. Some numbers in Japanese can be said differently depending on their use and the type of reading. One onyomi reading of 0 in Japanese is ma. Ma is 0, and then na. 7 in Japanese can be said as nana. Na is 7. Mana is 07. All right, we might be getting somewhere. Yugo. While not an exact match, there is a way to say 6 in Japanese, which sounds like ryu, and go is 5 in Japanese. So Yugo can be 6-5. 0, 7, 6, 5. All right, now for Ryoho. and this is where I got stuck. There wasn't a way to say one of the first 11 numbers in Japanese, which would even be a decent fit to either of the moras in Ryoho's name. My supposed breakthrough had led me to a brick wall. That was until I realized something. Earlier in the week, my Japanese lesson involved a number of ways of saying both of something. Both people, both directions, both option A and option B, etc. One word we learned? Ryoho. It's Japanese for both sides. Both sides in this case being 07 and 65. Mana and Yugo. They're equal. My analytical, sleep-deprived mind nearly collapsed in on itself, but I pulled myself back from the brink, and I began thinking of all the different forms and branches of mathematics. Algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, anything that had operations which would make 0 and 7 and 6 and 5 equal to each other. As this went on, I realized I hadn't eaten anything in 2 days, so I wandered out of my apartment and down the street. Only a couple minutes away was a gas station, which I entered the store to buy some Milky Ways and beef jerky. Breakfast of champions. This entire time, I hadn't bothered thinking about where I was or what I was doing. I bit through the Milky Way wrapper and set upon the bar like a feral dog. It was only when I glanced up at the gas prices that I noticed the logo for the gas station. It was a 7-Eleven. 0 plus 7 is 7, and 6 plus 5 is 11. I nearly inhaled a wad of caramel and nougat in shock. Finally, I was getting somewhere. When you look at the 7-Eleven logo, the number 7 and the word 11 do not overlap with each other, and despite its appearance, the 11 does not bisect the 7. Rather, they are a single entity. There is no third number because Ryoho does not translate to a numerical value, but its presence is represented by the position of the word 11. It appears to divide and yet unites. Just as Ryoho lays on the ground, separating and yet uniting Yugo and Mana in the connection scene. I sprinted back to my apartment, still carrying the beef jerky and now half of a Milky Way, and after some quick research, discovered that 7-Eleven is actually under the ownership of a Japanese conglomerate called 7&I Holdings, with its subsidiary being 7-Eleven Japan. 7-Eleven Incorporated, the group behind the US store chain, was bought out by the Japanese company in 2004. 2004 was not just 1 year after this game's release. It was the number in my street address at the time. Somehow, the connection scene was connecting to me. Was it paranoia? Overexposure to this one piece of media? Or was this prolonged search for meaning in the connection scene, in fact, a search for something that was already there? Like Oedipus finding out that the man he killed was his father and the wife he took was his mother, the connection I'd been looking for had been there the entire time. And I realized it wasn't just to me. The connection scene is about more than a connection between a dragon and some spirit Halloween mask that they call the Unborn. It is a series of connections between everyone and everything, not unlike certain ground-level principles of Shinto, which Ryoho practices. So too are there connections among everyone and everything as there are kami in everything, visualizing as a dense web of interconnected fibers so condensed as to make all connections indiscernible from and universal to each other. We are many, and yet we are one. And as one among that one, I can confidently say that the connection scene is a load of shit, just like Bloody Roar 4.